Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another one of our quarterly specials where myself and the wonderful astrologer Pam Gregory get together for a preview of the upcoming equinoxes and solstices. And today we're going to be previewing the Aries Equinox that takes place later this month on the 20th/21st of March. And we have a lot to talk about today, but so without further ado, Pam, how are you doing? Lovely to be in touch again.
Yeah, really wonderful to connect with you again. It's always a joy, Davyd, and we have such rich discussions. So really, really looking forward to our conversation. There's so much to talk about this time around, even more than usual. So
it really is. And I know I always say this, but these equinoxes and solstices from the last few years have been super, super powerful. And this one is no different, right? We're going to be dealing a lot with the energy of Aries and fire and not just all of that, but there's so many other things going on in the run up to this equinox, but also what's coming straight after it. You know, even within the days after the equinox, we've got some powerful stuff happening. So let's get into the astrology because there's a lot to chew on and lots of interesting side notes. So where would you like to start today, Pam?
Yeah, I think just before I show the chart, it's important to say that, you know, astrology is the study of cycles. And we as astrologers, like economists or meteorologists, always look back at what happened last time. So obviously I'll be doing that because the Aries equinox is considered by astrologers to be the beginning of the astrological year for the next 12 months. The chart I'm going to be showing is really the kind of striking the tuning fork, the backdrop, the zeitgeist for the next 12 months. So realize how important it is. But beyond the astrology, it isn't just same old, because we have extraordinary surges of light coming in, extraordinary M-class, X-class storms. I'm going to confess that Davyd and I did this recording yesterday in the middle of a massive solar storm and got the sound completely scrambled and it was impossible to continue. So this is, you know, a Groundhog Day. We're going to do it cleanly, hopefully this time. But the level of electromagnetic instability is quite extreme, but it means that we as little human entities are getting a lot more information coming in at us, and all of that is upgrading every cell in our body. And the photonic light particularly is coming in massive surges, and it will do particularly around the equinox. So if you can be in a situation of joining a mass meditation in person or online, that will be very beneficial for you because the group energy magnifies your individual energy.
Yeah, for sure. And as you always say, you know, these equinoxes and solstices are a chiming fork for the next 3 months. But in the case of the Aries one, it's at the beginning of the astrological year. So it is kind of like a little bit of a blueprint, I guess, for how the next 12 months are going to play out. And for sure, yes, we had a very valiant attempt yesterday to try and record in the middle of one of the biggest solar storms that has embraced the Earth possibly in the last like few hundred years. And not surprisingly, the lights went out, the sound went off, and I ended up feeling very sick in the afternoon. So if any of you out there have been feeling a little icky, there are a lot of things flying around, not just in the solar flares, but also in the atmosphere. And I feel that many people have been talking about the ascension pains, which I think perhaps are not just necessarily the symptoms of our fields getting upgraded, but the upgrade to me is really about clearing out the field. We only get to upgrade when we clear out the sludge. And maybe that's something we're going to talk a little bit about later in the show, because it's really important. You know, there is no divine right to ascending or to fifth dimensional consciousness. It requires work from all of us. And, you know, that work requires looking into those deep, dark recesses where we don't want to poke around too much because we haven't been down there for a few years and we don't know what we might find. But, you know, working with the plants as you know, that I do, and so that we do over at quantumplанthealing.com, we've got many different ways of cleansing our fields to make sure that we can receive the fullest benefits of the wonderful light and energy that's coming onto the planet. So it's always a balance of, you know, being able to do the inner work and then being able to receive the benefits afterwards. So I know that we have a lot of astrology that kind of points towards the benefits that we can glean right now. And as always, we can look at the astrology with the higher notes or the lower notes, and we're going to try to navigate our way best we can through all of those, right? So do you want to bring up the chart, Pam, and we'll get into it?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to echo what you're saying about cleansing and clearing, because as we record this on late on the 28th of Feb, we still have the, you know, the upcoming Virgo full moon. That's all about cleansing, clearing, purification. But the bigger picture is just shed the old you. Shed the old you in every possible sense that you can do it. Cleanse your consciousness, cleanse your energy field, because this isn't a regular spring clean. This is a whole new episode for humanity. You know, it's a totally different scale. So let me share the chart, because there's a lot to go through here.
Sure. And even though today's show is going to be looking at the equinox, and I know that you focused on the full moon in your own show, and I have too with Kelly, but the something I just want to bring people's attention to is that on the full moon, Orcus, one of the KBOs, is conjunct the full moon in Virgo. And Orcus is something important to talk about, because it's also the Oathbreaker, and it's also the being that I think hands out punishments for those who stray away from the path, right? So before we get into the equinox, you just want to say anything about that, Pam? Because I know it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I love Orcus. He's in myth, he's an Etruscan god of the underworld who punishes oathbreakers, who punishes those who violate sacred law and the divine order. And what he does in the myth is a little like Pluto's myth, actually, is take them down to the underworld, make them face their mistakes, their errors, show them the truth. And only when they can see the truth do they come back up to the light. But he's very much connected to retribution and divine justice. So the fact that he's conjunct this full moon, I think, is extremely interesting for where we are at in society right now, because we're just entering a massive time of revelation and disclosure.
Right, and of course, it's also a full moon in Virgo, and Virgo is really, I guess, the astrological sign most connected to plants and plant medicine and healing. Yeah. And, you know, one of the things we're working with over at Quantum Plant Healing this month is nettle. In fact, tomorrow we're going to be doing we're going to be starting a 13-day live global plant immersion with nettle. And one of the interesting, magical, energetic quantum aspects of nettle is that he's a plant that can help break curses and hexes, which are another type of contract, you can say, between beings, which I think is interesting. And maybe they're not sacred contracts or sacred vows. They're ones that are conjured literally, perhaps out of lower frequency emotions. So I think it's interesting, as always, that the plants are absolutely on point, showing us what we need to work with. And of course, the other interesting thing is that we're going to be looking at is that Pluto is entering into Aquarius. I think, when is the date exactly for that, Pam?
23rd of March.
So it's literally 2 days after the equinox. And, you know, Pluto has a cycle of 248 years, which, as it turns out, is pretty much equivalent to 7 generations. And in the world of curses, ancestral blood curses can only last 7 generations. And so I think it's interesting over the last month or so that I've seen a lot of clients coming to me who, aside from other things, have got curses in their field that are coming to their 7th generational limit and needing to be removed. And also what's interesting is that sometimes the person who's coming is actually the person who put the original curse 7 generations back, and it's come back on them, which of course is something that happens in magic. So I just wanted to add this in because it's from the world of quantum magic. It's often how we see these little nuances that make, for me anyway, the astrology come alive in a more plant-filled way. So anyway, Orcus, I'm sure we're going to...
goes around, comes around.
Booyaka, exactly. So anyway, Orcus aside, let's get into the Aries Equinox. And where would you like to start?
Yeah, wonderful. So it's happening quite early. It's happening, for instance, in the UK at 26 minutes past 9 in the evening. EST will be 5 hours back from that. So it normally happens on the 21st, but this time around it's happening for much of the world on the 20th. And as I say, it really is the beginning of the astrological new year. And there's so many indicators in this chart of endings and beginnings. You know, massive themes of endings and beginnings. And it becomes fractal, whether you go from the 5 new moons that we're in the middle of at 1 degree of their sign, you know, the 7 full moons at 16 degrees of their sign, which the 16th card in the tarot is the Tower. We're definitely at a Tower moment for humanity. Whichever way you cut the cake in terms of fractals, they are very clear messages of endings and beginnings. So for instance here, we have Pluto at 29 degrees 57 minutes of Capricorn within 3 minutes of leaving Capricorn, which he does just 3 days later on the 23rd. I'm going to do a whole video on Pluto moving into Aquarius. There's so much to say because he's going to do that until 2044. It's going to stay in Aquarius once he moves fully into that sign until 2044. So for many of us, it's going to be the rest of our lives. It's a big deal. Anyway, he's a big signifier of endings, but also beginnings. We also have Sedna here. Sedna has an 11,400 year cycle. She's within 2 minutes of the final degree of Taurus. And she will be moving into Gemini in June. And you might think, well, June's, a few months away. But if you've got an 11,400 year orbit, it's a drop in the ocean. And so Sedna is very much signaling endings and beginnings as well. And so interesting, these two planets are moving out of Earth, out of density, out of fossil fuels, heavy industry, the myth of Sedna, as I've been talking about in the recent video with Jennifer Gale, we are moving away from what has represented our safety and security. In the myth, she and her father were in a big storm in a canoe, and to save himself, service to self, her father threw her out of the canoe. And when she tried to hold on, he chopped off her fingers, and she and her fingers floated down to the icy Arctic deep and transformed into beautiful sea creatures of turtles, whales, dolphins. So the message, one of the big themes there is let go of whatever you thought was safe and secure or represented safety and security, because we are going to transform utterly into different beings. And I really believe we are. This is the transformation of humanity that we're witnessing. So they're two very big, heavyweight archetypes signaling endings and beginnings. We then have...
Can I just jump in there actually a second, Pam, and just talk about Sedna?
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. We're leaving the safety and security, I guess, of the Earth, of Taurus, right? And we're moving into the energy of Gemini. So how do you see that shift with this big, slow-moving planet? Are we moving more into an airspace with Gemini, or what?
Yeah, definitely. And with Pluto moving into Aquarius as well. So we're moving away, in both instances, out of Capricorn, out of Taurus. We're moving away from not only density in terms of our physical density, we're moving more into the light body, but we are moving away from our wealth and our status, having defined who we are. We're moving away from long-term bricks and mortar ownership, job for life, home for life, car for life, that kind of thing. We're moving into something which is much more experiential, away from territorial materialism and towards shared experiences. People will want not to invest for profit, but to invest for people. They will want to come together in humanity and community. And I see Sedna as moving into Gemini as a real breakthrough in terms of our consciousness, our mind, because Gemini is to do with our mind and our mindset. But I also see the shift of both of these planets signaling much more galactic communication. We are going to step back into becoming galactic citizenry in a much clearer way. We're going to remember our galactic heritage. And I think but everything will speed up. Everything will be super fast and speed up. And already, actually, I don't know how your life is. I mean, my feet are just not touching the ground right now.
Hanging in there, just.
Just live in a wind tunnel. So, it's, everything is going to speed up, and it's going to be about a lot of information, a lot of ideas. Stay grounded as these planets move out of Earth. Keep your bare feet on the ground is a big message, I think.
And I think it's also interesting, that we're moving into these two air signs. When I think of air, it's much more of the mind, which makes me immediately think of much more quantum ideas. Yep. And obviously, I feel that kind of Aquarius is really the quantum zodiac sign of the whole piece. But, Gemini also always makes me think of two truths, like, switching between this one and that one. And so, again, I know that we're going to probably focus on this a little bit at different points. But again, that sort of almost two choices. Which one do you choose that makes you feel more safe and secure? The more fractal, natural pathway of maybe more Taurian, Virgo energies, or do we choose something that maybe is a bit more Aquarius, a bit more AI, a bit more hybridized? We don't know. So which is our truth that we follow? And I think that this energy in Gemini, and Mars has already been shaking things up anyway for us, right? Backwards and forwards. I can't remember a time when Mars wasn't in Gemini and Uranus wasn't in Taurus. But it seems like a very long time ago. But, looking at the astrology here, Mars finally is going to be moving out of Gemini soon. But I feel like many of the movements of the last couple of months have been these sort of review processes with the planets in retro, getting us into a new mindset, getting us prepared, maybe even for a new mindset, so that when finally Pluto does do its final ingress into Aquarius, which is when, I think, at the end of
23rd, its final ingress, its final entry point until 2044 is in December 2044. 2024.
You're giving me a mild cardiac arrest there. 2044.
Sorry.
I can hang on that long.
It's entering finally and fully December 2024 for 20 years.
Right. Wow. Okay.
But everything you've just said there, Davyd, they are all themes which are reinforced in this Aries equinox. Both Aquarius and Gemini are linked to freedom. Aquarius strongly linked to freedom, Gemini very linked to being non-conformist, and that's going to be picked up in other things other aspects I'm going to talk about in this chart. And it's also what you've been talking about with AI and robotics and digitization. Absolutely, there's a timeline on that, clear as day, that we can see. It's here right now. You don't have to choose that timeline. It is not necessarily your timeline. We have a choice because other things are indicated in here to give us a very different choice. But I've said this many times, with the micro decisions you make in a day, start to think like a chess player. Don't just think this is super convenient to pay for my vegetables with a chip in my hand. Think like a chess player. Think 20 moves down the board.
I agree.
What is that going to mean for you? And I mean that in every cell of my body. Yeah. Because these tiny decisions can lead to something else for you. So, I really want to shout that, even though I'm English.
Well said, Pam. I totally agree 100%. This is one of the teachings of Dandelion. It's like every single thing you do matters. Every second of every day is the most important second in that moment. So make sure that it's right thoughts, right speech, and right actions, because otherwise you might end up a little bit further down the road regretting some of your decisions. And, you used a wonderful word, which I just want to highlight, which is fractal. We have a fractal choice here. And, that fractal understanding is something that I think is going to come much more powerfully to most of humanity in the coming weeks, months, and years, because, once we understand fractal, that whatever is going on for me at this level is also a fractal representation of what is going on for the collective, and therefore whatever I do does affect the collective. Which
totally.
Again,
we've got to be aware. We've got to be aware of that spiritual responsibility. Saturn moving into Pisces, of we are responsible not only for creating our own reality, but actually feeding. We're a drop in the ocean. We affect the collective. We can't stop affecting the collective because we broadcast 24/7, whatever frequency we're on. So, big theme of endings and beginnings, and to continue the beginnings, Saturn literally has just moved into Pisces. It does that on the 7th, 8th of March, depending on where you are in the world. Manway, obviously the sun is moving into Aries. That's what the Aries equinox is about at 0 of Aries. It's conjunct Manway, dwarf planet at 1 degree of Aries. And I always want to call this the creator degree. 0, 1 degree of Aries is the creator degree. It's the very first degree of the zodiac. And Manway, in his myth, with his wife Vada, created the original cosmos. He is the highest archangel, closest to the mind of God, the highest source of divine intelligence. He operates outside space and time. And he is very much the symbol for New Earth. And it's remarkable that with his 289-year orbit, he is at 1 degree of Aries at the Aries equinox. I mean, that is a real big bell to say this is the beginning of New Earth. We also have Ceres at 0 of Libra, another beginning. That is also on the world axis. Remember, 0 of the cardinals within 2 degrees either way, world axis. So that suggests, in its opposition to the sun here, that in some areas, harvests, grains, food could be an issue. We are seeing some food shortages around the world. So again, plan and prepare accordingly. But to continue the theme of beginnings, we also have Homer, who I've squeezed in here, at 034 of Scorpio. So Homer is another major symbol of New Earth, because one of her major themes, which I've spoken about before, is how she's a highly regenerative principle. She's linked to the Hawaiian goddess of fertility. She's able to birth babies from all over her body, not just the regular places. She has a magic stick called the Makalai, and when the land was laid waste through poor agricultural practices, she could always instantly summon wild food from the land and from the seas. She has a deep instinctive shamanic connection with the earth. So all of that is very much a symbol for New Earth. But what connects her also to this more radical, rebellious energy, which is also linked to Pluto moving into Aquarius, is she has a whole other theme, which I only discovered fairly recently. I was talking to Kelly Hunter about this in our last video, but in one aspect of her myth, her partner was picking wild bananas on the island of Hawaii. And he was arrested by the authoritarian leader, because the rule was that, you know, only the elite, the governmental elite, should have first pickings to the best food, and whatever was left could then filter down to the common people. So her partner was arrested, was going to be put to death for picking these wild bananas, if you can believe. And Homer summoned the spirit, she summoned her ancestors, and she summoned the community. And without really any weapons that the government had, she actually, through spiritual means as much as anything else, she got her partner released and altered the whole balance of power, making power much more equitable, bringing power back to the ordinary people on the island and away from authoritarian rule. Now, that is a massive theme of Pluto moving out at the end of Capricorn into Aquarius.
Don't you think that also is very much a motif of the new earth that I know many of us are moving into, which is about the right to collect resources? And who do they belong to? They don't belong to us. They don't belong to the elites. And so who gets to decide who picks bananas and who doesn't? Who gets to decide about any of these things, in fact? You know, it's all about right relationship with Mother Earth and understanding that there should be reciprocity, or Aini, as it's called in South America. You know, and understanding that that we for too long have been under the spell of this idea that somehow people above us get to choose what we have access to, which of course in a sovereign new earth is really just a big load of BS. So I think it's interesting that we have this energy in Scorpio, the sign of death and rebirth, and it's also going to be conjuncting the South Node, right? So it's also going to be bringing up those things about the past, particularly to do with medications and poisons and the rich, the famous, money, all of that stuff, and how all of that has been somewhat coagulated, I guess, over the last few years into something a little bit more insidious. And so I'm wondering whether Haumea, with her sort of energies of the goddess and you know, of fertility, but with the Scorpio energy, is going to shake things up for a while. How long does Haumea stay in Scorpio, Pam?
Oh, I'd say, I'm slightly guessing now, but she's got a 283-year orbit. So it's going to be about 20 to 25 years. It's going to be a long time. But wow. Yes, all of what you say is absolutely right, David, because when I was talking to Heather Ensworth, who has great knowledge about Indigenous tribes, she was actually saying there's no word for ownership. You know, there's no concept of ownership because everybody owns everything because there's enough for everybody. And so bringing it back to what I love about the Kuiper belt objects, the dwarf planets, they are all in alignment to natural law, to right relationship with nature, right relationship with the earth. They have this sense of oneness with all of nature. They respect all sentient beings. They have a sense of moral compass with regard to the earth and nature. And I can't wait to get back to that.
Yeah, because, me too. You know what's also... Sorry, go on. Yeah,
I think you're making the point about the South Node, David, and that's so true because the South Node in Scorpio is about big money, invested money, often deeply held secrets. It's very much to do with toxicity as well, medicines, toxicity, that kind of thing. And that axis stays in Taurus Scorpio until July. And so its job will be done, if you like, by then. And that's very interesting in itself. But to reinforce this whole thing about nature and the earth and right relationship, we have here Venus conjunct the North Node in Taurus. And that is real, and it's quite a tight conjunction. It's really saying, because the North Node is our future collective destiny, that we have to move forwards with love. Venus is in its own sign of Taurus. It's very strong here. We have to move forwards with love, love for nature, love for the earth. And in Taurus, everything is done in simple, old-fashioned ways. We do it in, biodynamic farming, the natural rhythms of the earth. This is not engineered. It's not industrialized. It's not GMO. It's done. It treats the earth with love. And I think that's a really big message to reinforce some of these other aspects here. And the sun is conjunct Neptune, which has moved forwards with unconditional love and a sense of oneness. And also reinforcing that again, the moon is in Pisces, ruled by Neptune. So there's a real sense of the spiritual, the mystical coming in here, this blending with the oneness of everything, and really a whole new octave of consciousness coming in at this Aries equinox, which is immensely exciting. And shall I keep going, David?
Yeah, so I wanted to also just add in one comment. There are some organizations out there that would have us believe that by 2030 we'll own nothing and be happy. So I just want to make the point that that's a very different emphasis on what we're talking about, because, we're understanding we don't necessarily need to own anything, but what we do need is to feed ourselves occasionally. And so I just want to make that point that there are two very subtle differences. And for those of us who are paying attention to these things, the inverted messages often actually are very, very close to what the New Earth message also is. So just to make that subtle point before we continue, for those who understand what we're talking about. But please go ahead.
Yeah, well done. And to just take in our bread and butter planets for a moment, if you like, we have very heavy emphasis here in Aries. We've got the Sun, Mercury, Chiron, Jupiter. And yes, this can be warlike because it's ruled by Mars, god of war in myth. And indeed, Mars is actually in an out of sign square to the moon, to the Sun and Neptune, because on the 25th of March, it moves into 0 of Cancer, and it's easier to see then as a square, if you know what I mean. But it's currently even in an out of sign square, and that can really emphasize this very militaristic, this warrior energy. But remember, it doesn't have to be expressed as kinetic war. It can be us as spiritual warriors. It can be our courage, our daring, our bravery. Be a pioneer, be a hero in your own life. Take a risk, step forward, do something different. This is a whole new episode, Aries, the very first sign of the zodiac. And again, reinforcing this idea, and I'm going to pick it up again in a moment, about being the maverick, being the individual, being independent, is we have Chiron, and Chiron, people know well, is the wounded healer. It's very much to do with sickness and healing as well. So Jupiter is expanding that energy. We might see a lot around health at this time. But also another aspect of Chiron is the maverick, the outsider. He orbits outside the orbit of Saturn, the conventional. He doesn't fit in. And those of people who've been through strong Chiron transits know how kind of unjust sometimes it seems that you're just cast out of a group, or you're cast out of society. You don't fit the convention. So, and just to finish off this square with Mars, because Mars square Neptune, just be aware, because this can be putting a lot of energy into the spiritual, which is a very positive aspect of it. It can be ill-judged aggression, or aggression at sea as well. And when we look at the astrocartography, that may have more meaning. But it's because Mars stays out of bounds, out of the normal 23 degrees north or south of the ecliptic within which planets normally orbit until early May. Mars has a trigger-happy, out-of-control extreme quality to it right now. So if you're feeling, kind of suddenly, wow, you're feeling this temper or this rage or this, angry response, step back, take a breath, think. don't just leap in, because Mars could lead you to misjudgments of anger and aggression. Stay in peace. The more we stay in peace with all of this Aries energy, the more we will diffuse whatever warlike energy is happening in the world. That's really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And being Scorpio, Mars is a big part of my energy. And I have Mars in Scorpio too, conjunct our little friend Ixion. So I know all about that kind of energy. But you know what, having hopefully progressed a bit beyond my earlier years and understanding that trigger happy response invariably just escalates situations rather than fix it. And even if we feel great at being justified in the moment at venting whatever happens or has happened to us, it doesn't really fix anything. It normally just aggravates the situation. So, this is again where our friend Nettle, the meditative spiritual warrior, comes in. Very, very fiery, defensive plant, but actually is one of the best plants to meditate with, because it takes you to a place of no mind and emptiness. And, so I, again, find it interesting that these plants step forwards in the moment that the astrology shows that we need them. How to channel that fiery energy of Mars that Nettle has, that, also is connected to Aries in a positive way that is productive, that is direct without being aggressive and confrontational. How to channel that inner sense of calm and peace, right, into a more productive output.
Yeah, 100%. And just to pick up on what you were saying, David, about Ixion, because Ixion reinforces some of the themes we've been talking about, because man-weight is square and the sun in Aries, 0th Aries, is square to Ixion. Ixion's a dwarf planet, I've mentioned before. At the negative expression, he's known as the lawless brother of Pluto. He murdered his father-in-law, had no regrets, so he was thrown out of heaven by the gods. Zeus gave him a second chance, but he rather blew that by trying to rape Zeus's wife. And at that point, yeah, he really did a number. So he was then spun off on a burning wheel into eternity. But at a positive level of expression, this is about going beyond the normal social boundaries, the normal social mores, finding your bliss, finding your joy in simplicity, your joy in nature, coming back to your unique, independent, individual path and finding your joy and your bliss. And many, many people are doing that, because this is reinforcing this Chiron theme I've just been talking about. It's reinforcing Pluto moving into Aquarius. It's also actually reinforcing Sedna moving into Gemini, because Gemini is the sign of nonconformism. So there are a lot of clear themes which are, reinforced. And just one other thing, which may be of interest, which reinforces some of the things we've been talking about. We've also got a very close quincunx here between Mars, which is your individual sense of power, and Pluto, which is state power, governmental power, and a clash there. Quincunx is a hard aspect. So again, that is really reinforcing this shift of Pluto from the last final degrees of Capricorn, top-down power, we do what the government says, into Aquarius, the power just beginning to shift to the people. Aquarius is the people, Aquarius is freedom, Aquarius is equability, Aquarius is humanitarianism. Now, this is a long-term 21-year transit, so I'm not suggesting it's all going to happen in a day, a month, a year, but it is the beginning of the shift away from top-down power to the individuals, to the people. And also Aquarius is a very community-based collaborative energy. And all over the world, you are seeing these incredible groups springing up, grassroots up communities that are saying, do you know what? We're out of here. We're going to create a more loving, sharing society where we come together and live in a very different way. And that's absolutely happening right now, anticipating that move of Pluto into Aquarius and really echoing the more spiritual energies that are coming in here as well.
Well, that's super interesting on a number of fronts. And maybe I'll talk about this before the end, about Pluto into Aquarius and quantum communities, which is something we're already developing with your help over the last couple of years at Quantum Plant Healing. But what I really just wanted to highlight was, and you picked on it a good few times, is this idea of the maverick. And when you use that word, what it makes me think of is standing in one's truth and not caring too much about what everybody else thinks about what you're doing, not doing what you're doing because you're worried about what somebody else is doing, or saying what you think somebody else wants to hear, but being in your integrity and being okay with that. It's okay to be me. It's okay. I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to mess people up. I just want to be me, and I want to do the things that make me feel good. You know, again, we come back to that fractal aspect. If you're living your life for somebody else, whoever that might be, family members, partners, boss, you're not living your life for yourself. So we're then feeding that into the collective, that we're not living our own lives. We're not living our own truths. And if there's one thing that I really pray for in the new earth, is that everybody gets to live their truth in the fullest expression of who they are, because we're all amazing, all absolutely mind-blowingly amazing. But we just have to believe in that, and we have to be able to see it for ourselves and not have our lives and our sense of self validated by other people and other situations.
Yeah, very well said. And isn't it interesting that Uranus, the planet of truth that rules Aquarius, is still what I consider, I just think of an equal sign in my head, because 15 degrees of the fixed signs is 45 degrees, a semi-square, away from 0 of the cardinals. So 15 degrees of the fixed signs, give or take 2 degrees either way, so 13 degrees to 17 degrees of the fixed signs, is considered to be on the world axis, i.e. semi-square, i.e. equals. So Uranus is still at the world axis. Uranus is the planet of truth, is the planet of the maverick, the planet of individuality, the planet of freedom, and the planet of awakening. And to me, this Aries equinox strikes the drum for the real surge in awakening that we're going to see amongst the global populace. And so interesting also with Pluto moving into Aquarius. Pluto is the planet of secrets. Pluto is the planet of the underground, the underhand, things that are hidden. Uranus, Aquarius ruled by Uranus, is the planet of truth, clarity, bring it to the light of day. So I think we're going to see, with the striking of this gong at the Aries equinox, enormous amounts of revelation and disclosure as we go forwards from this point. And it just rolls through the eclipses in April and May as well. It's a very exciting, it's a higher octave of consciousness that we're moving into.
Right, for sure, and for those of us who are sort of, I guess, paying a little bit more attention to alternative streams, the disclosures have been going on for a while. And I think really the disclosures are there for whoever wants to see them, whoever's able to see them. And I think that that's also a big step. Maybe you can speak through the astrology in this. How are those illusions going to get broken down? How are people going to start seeing the reality? Is that something that we can see in Neptune's placement, maybe?
Yes, absolutely. Because Neptune is about the illusion, the veil, it's very related to film and glamour and, creating the illusion that isn't actually true, the fantasy, or the disillusionment, if you like. And so there can be quite a shock when that veil comes down. Neptune is also, in its rulership of Pisces, related to the media and to drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, companies that make them. So, there's some very big themes, I think, coming up here, which are super interesting. That so it will definitely, and also Mars being in Gemini, social media, squaring Neptune. So either via the mainstream media or social media, I think there are going to be a lot of developments as we move forwards, for sure.
Right. And of course, Neptune is in Pisces. So that always makes me think of the murky depths that we can't quite see down to. And, can we talk about water a little bit more? Because we have Saturn moving into Pisces. And I know this is something that everybody's talking about right now, but I think there's a few interesting points we both like to share. So what can you say about that? Because I know it happens around the time of the equinox. So perhaps let's just focus on that for a second, because I think water is very, very important moving into New Earth.
Yeah, 7th, 8th of March, depending on where you are in the world, Saturn moves into Pisces. Will stay there till February 2026. So that will heighten the focus on Pisces. And I'll come back to that. And I've got a whole video on that, actually. But also the whole myth of Sedna, even though she's moving out of Earth and into air, her whole myth is about the icy waters of the Inuit people. It's all about the deep oceans. And just to pick up on something else before I come back to Saturn in Pisces, we have Salacia here, 7 of Aries, and she is square to Ixion. Now, Salacia in myth is the wife of Neptune. She's mermaid energy. She's linked to the shimmering moonlight and sunlight on the seas. I think, therefore, she's linked to photonic light, photonic energy, which is upgrading us. But I also feel, because she's prominent here in not only in her conjunction to Mercury, greater understanding of the oceans and seas and the photonic light, but also in her square to Ixion, I think we are going to literally dive deep into understanding so much more about the seas and the oceans than we have ever done in terms of its healing potential, its healing ability. That can be either in terms of its amino acids or its nutrients deep in the ocean. I think there's so much to discover there. I mentioned in a recent video, there was a Frenchman called René Quinton, who died in the early 1900s. And he discovered that if he filtered seawater, and don't try this at home because I think there's slightly more to it, but he injected seawater into very sick people, they regained their health. And his work still continues. You can still buy Quinton water in pharmacies in Europe, which is just amazing. His work continues. So there is so much we have yet to discover on a bigger level about the oceans. But Saturn in Pisces is going to teach us so much more about the importance of the quality of water, how precious water is. Apparently underneath the mantle of the earth, we have something called primary water, where there are 5 times as much primary water as there is in all the oceans of the world put together. Structured water, that's a literal translation of Saturn and Pisces, structured water. We're going to understand that much better, how valuable that is for our health, how we structure water, not only by various devices that you can buy, simply by sending water love, sending water gratitude. We change the structure of water. But high quality water, we're going to start to really understand and value in a much greater way than we've ever done it before. You know, in the recent past in the Western world, we thought we were lucky just to turn on the tap and drink the water. And yes, indeed we are, because so few people in the world, tiny percentage of people actually have access to clean water. So it's clean, but it isn't necessarily healthy for us. So we're gonna start to see water as living consciousness with which we flow.
Yes.
Living consciousness with which we flow. We are just, we drink water and we urinate it out, and we are part of that living consciousness. So whatever is the structure of the water, we actually absorb within us, not only for our health, but for our own consciousness.
Right. Wow. So many amazingly important points there. And just to loop back to the first ones, of course, you know, one of the things I often recommend to clients who want to cleanse and keep clean is Epsom salt baths. Or if you're blessed enough to live by the sea, go and have a dip in the sea every day. Salt through the field is an excellent way of keeping a lot of unhelpful stuff out. But also, you know, what I love about Saturn and Pisces and being very Piscean like yourself, you know, I often think that Saturn moving into Pisces is a bit like the Ark. How are we going to sail the oceans of consciousness, you know, the Piscean collective waters of consciousness without springing a leak? And when I think about the quality or the structure of water, of course, as humans, we're very water-based. I think maybe 90% plus of us is water, right? Something like that. And if the structure of the water in us is incoherent, it's going to attract other incoherent frequencies, which in the case of Saturn and Pisces, it means that below the water line, we might spring a leak because we've got some incoherencies, in which case it could be difficult to stay floating on, you know, the ocean as we head towards our new Earth horizons, you know, those new lands of promise, etc., etc. So I just wanted to bring this in because I understand that water is very, very important for a number of reasons. And yes, you know, in the Western world, we've been blessed enough to have tap water, although many of us have realized in the last decade that tap water maybe wasn't the best for us. And, you know, I think that the nature or the quality of water is going to become very, very important. And I love what you said about the amount of water under the earth, because it reminds me of something I read somewhere once, you know, that so maybe water that is springing out of a mountain in Colombia actually started off as rainfall in Wales, and it went down through the aquifers into the water table and then traveled across the world only to appear as a spring maybe in the Andes somewhere. I mean, that's just beautiful, you know, to think about these things, how Mother Earth is always operating in this regenerational, recyclable way. And I think that's also a big theme of of New Earth is how do we become aware that we are also our own toroidal field in the same way that Mother Earth is, and how do we become a self-sufficient regenerative mechanism, machine, piece of equipment, human being in our own way without needing anything from anybody else? How do we source our food? How do we source our medicine? How do we look after ourselves? You know, do we need to go to somebody else to ask for advice on how we look after ourselves? Or do we become au fait with our own inner world and our own inner physician and start communicating, not just with the waters in our body, but all of the beings in our body? There's millions of us in here. You know, Davyd is not just the person who's talking right now. Davyd is millions of beings, including his organs, his blood, blah, 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 blah. You know, and we have to take care of all of these beings because as the captain of the ship, spiritual responsibility, I think, is a big topic right now as well. It's like, how am I being spiritually responsible for myself? Never mind everything going on around me. So I think these are really, really important points. And I'm glad that we got to talk about water because I do think that, like with the work of Emoto, we can see that we can change the structure of water. So if we can do it with water in a glass like this one, we can do it to the water in our body too. I love myself. Really, I do. I love myself. So that is going to be an important mantra for all of us as we move forwards. And I think that how we view water is going to be very quantum in the sense that, you know, water can also hold memory and information. So maybe the hard drives of the future are going to be big water tanks that somehow we can store quantum information in. Who knows? But I think these are very exciting thoughts and very important ones as we move forwards beyond the equinox.
And also, I think Saturn Pisces is very much to do with spiritual integrity, spiritual mastery, becoming your own spiritual master in your own life. I think that's hugely important because what you were saying, Davyd, it's so interesting about, you know, rainwater in Wales becomes this, you know, spring in wherever, South America, because as I understand, all the oceans of the world are connected because the water flows. You know, these are very odd bedfellows, Saturn in Pisces, because water just flows and joins and doesn't have natural boundaries in that sense. Water is attracted to water. Obviously, we've got land boundaries, but so what is this going to be about? Is it going to be that certain nations are going to try and define this is my ocean? This is my water and not yours, because that paradigm is going to collapse. You know, that sense of ownership is going to collapse. But I think spiritual mastery, spiritual integrity are a very big part of Saturn in Pisces, and the ability to structure water with our own high frequency emotion of love, joy, gratitude, etc.
Exactly. And of course, our friend Tumea is there again, questioning who has the right to decide who owns what. And, you know, I think another big question is coming pretty soon, if it's not already here, is who owns space above the planet? You know, and technically, who owns anything really here on Mother Earth? That's a big question we should be asking ourselves, you know. And as I've said before, when we moved into this place, we were very aware that we don't, even though on the paperwork we own it, you know, whatever, but realistically, we're guardians. That's the most important point. And I think as we move forwards into the new earth, we're going to question the idea of ownership. And again, you know, are we just guardians of places, of spaces, of other animals, etc., etc., or do we still feel the need to own things? And if so, you know, is that still that Pluto and Capricorn energy? And is that what we're going to see over the, you know, next year and a half, is like that swinging, that wrecking ball, as I like to call it, of Pluto smashing the hell out of the last few degrees of Capricorn, and hopefully the top down hierarchy, you know, that basically decides who owns things and who doesn't. And I for one, would very much welcome a world where these things are suddenly negated, and we understand that nobody owns anything on planet Earth. She is her own being who is sharing her space with us, and the same with the plant and all of the resources, you know. So very
that's definitely where we're headed, Davyd. And isn't it interesting with what you're saying all around ownership and that myth of Homer, that Saturn is trying to Homer.
Right.
At Aries Equinox, Saturn's trying to Homer. And also we have a quincunx between Manwe, who can birth the new earth, and Homer, another great symbol for the birth of new earth. They're 150 degrees apart, pretty much. Manwe is also sextile Sedna as well, which is a very positive aspect, and square to Ixion. So there's some really strong geometry here to propel us forwards into new earth. And remember that new earth is not a place. New earth is a frequency, but it's a frequency that you have to embody within yourself in order to live it on the outside. It's within us. We are new earth, as it were.
Absolutely. I love that. And, as we move into the final section of today's show, I know that you want to talk a little bit about the astrocartography of this equinox, because I think it's really important. And as we were talking about yesterday on the Failed show, I realized that a lot of it's going to be falling on the part of the world where I'm currently residing. So I'm very curious to know more about this. So perhaps we can get into that for the last 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. Shall I kill the chart now, David?
Yeah, sure. I think we've seen it plenty. So
okay,
yeah, thanks for that. Very, very powerful equinox, right? So many wonderful things going on. And of course, some challenges, as always. Our friend Mars there is always likely to light the tinderbox up if he can. But I feel that with all of the other balancing energies we've got there, we've got a lot of potential to channel that energy into more thoughtful ways of being, mostly. And again, I couldn't concur more that this sense of responsibility in every second of every day to ourselves is of the paramount importance, not to be selfish about what we do, but to be centered in ourselves, to be self-centered is very, very important, because the more that we're centered in ourselves, the more that we can take that moment to breathe before we react to somebody's jibe that we don't like and say, you know what, I'm not going to rise to that. I'm just going to walk off right now and keep my boundaries intact. Again, our friend Nettle right now, how do we maintain our boundaries without getting into a fight? So, tell us about the astrocartography, because I think it's really
so astrocartography is really pretty powerful at this Aries equinox. So this is essentially, if the planets were to leave a shadow across the Earth at the moment of the Aries equinox, where would those shadows fall geographically? And where they fall on an angle of the chart, and by that I mean ascendant, descendant, midheaven, IC, those are the kind of threads in the compass needle, as it were, horizontal and vertical, they become very powerful. And it doesn't mean to say that all of these geographies I'm going to mention will come into the news, but it's very likely that some of them will, some of them will, because they increase their prominence by falling at an angle geographically at the Aries equinox. I hope I'm making sense. Anyway,
I get it.
So, first thing to mention is the planet Pluto, which is pretty dramatic and transformational. That is angular, skimming the west coast of Canada. It actually goes through Alaska, skimming the US west coast line. And then the Sun in Aries, and also Neptune, and also Mars on the midheaven. Mars in the midheaven, I'd say, is anger with governments. They are angular through Brazil. Now, Neptune always has the potential for flooding. Several other places are going to be picking that up as well. But Mars on the midheaven in Brazil, I think it's quite interesting, because there has been a lot of anger with the government. And remember, Mars is out of bounds till early May. So at this Aries equinox where we strike the gong, it's out of bounds. Also, the Sun in Aries and Neptune are going to be angular, and Mars on the base, the IC, the land, as it were, through, and that can bring in fire, extreme heat or fire. So we've got potential here for flooding and or fire through Western Australia, Eastern China, through the East China Sea, and I'm thinking of that Mars-Neptune square there, West Japan, Korea, East Indonesia, Taiwan, and the Philippines. Now,
it's basically the ring of fire, isn't it, Pam? I think. Isn't that the Pacific?
Yeah, absolutely. So it doesn't mean to say that all of those geographies will come into prominence, but they have the potential. Remember, this is striking gone for literally the next 12 months as a backdrop. And then we have Uranus on the midheaven, so that's potentially sudden changes in government through the central eastern US. It's a line basically going through Canada, Winnipeg, Minneapolis, running north-south down to Houston, Texas, and it's also running down through Mexico. And then finally, we have Uranus on the IC. We have a kind of eruptive volcanic potential, earthquake potential through Eastern India, Nepal, and Western China.
Wow.
So there are a lot of geographies that are, important big geometry, because often you get it running through the middle of the Pacific Ocean, which is no use to man or beast, So there's some very important geographies being highlighted here.
Well, just a couple of things that jump out at me. You mentioned Brazil, and having been following that situation a little bit, it's very difficult to discern what the hell is going on down there. So I feel that's the Neptune energy, coupled with Mars is exactly, and I think that this is something that we could all be facing, is discernment in which truths that are being presented to us. Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? Are there any good guys? Are there any bad guys? In the end. And I think that's super interesting, because I can see that the combination of Neptune and Mars on this equinox is going to throw up that idea of illusion. I'm angry, but I'm not sure who I should be angry at, because I'm not really sure who anybody is right now, right? But I'm angry anyway at somebody, right? And also the, Uranus on the midheaven running through the central US and down through Mexico, living here in Mexico, and having been into Texas recently, I can see how that whole kind of governmental situation can play out. Texas is a very strong proponent of independence within the US kind of situation, but also Mexico has a very interesting situation right now, being so close to Uncle Sam, and often being under the thumb of it. We have had a lot of action here over the last couple of months of trying to remove some of the less positive or pleasant forces that actually control a lot of what goes on in Mexico. And again, it's very difficult to discern who is really doing what at what level, but we do have the perception that our current president is doing the best he can to actually clean up the situation, which I think is interesting. So I can see, and actually what's interesting is that his running partner, this is AMLO, he's called, his running partner for the next general election is a female, and he's really pushing the feminine energy with that. So I think that's interesting as well. So maybe we'll see over the next 12 months whether there are going to be big governmental shifts in the northern part of the Americas, because obviously Canada, I feel, also still has quite a bit to go through before it comes to a more calm, happy place. Let's just say that, as indeed as most of North America. So very interesting. Yeah, wow, a lot to chew on there. Is there anything you'd like to add to all of what we've talked about, Pam, before we conclude for today?
I think the main thing is really focus not on the demolition site behind you, but really focus on this massive opportunity we've got to step into the new you. It isn't just a new you in terms of a new set of clothes or a new job or a new home. You are entering and being a new human. And I mean that in the most natural, organic way. We are going to step into becoming new humans of new earth that have, we're going to remember old talents and gifts and skills of telepathy, healing, all kinds of things that we have had in the past and forgotten, or that have been suppressed. So see the jump as that big, see it as a jump in your octave of consciousness, and leave everything behind that just is not going to support you moving forwards. It's much bigger than a spring clean. This is massive.
Yeah, it's possibly the biggest spring clean you'll ever do with yourself. And again, I just want to, for the last few minutes, bring in the aspect of the plants again, because, in my experience, and there are many other healing modalities that help clean your field, but the plants really, I believe, are the transition into the new earth, because they're so connected to Mother Earth. And as we're realizing through the powerful immersions we're doing, these are not just plants that grow in the cracks around us. These are powerful spiritual beings who come back to help. And, we want to offer a special discount code to people watching this video to come over to our quantumplanthealing.com website and participate in the Dandelion and Artemisia immersions that have already taken place. And the reason we're offering that is because they offer two very balanced sides to things. So Dandelion is much more masculine, yang, solar, and the Artemisias are much more yin, feminine, and lunar, although Dandelion also has the lunar seed head too. But those two sets of plants, Dandelion is one that gets us centered into our heart space. And when we're connected into our heart, really connected, we're actually connected to our higher self. But if our terrain, our energy field is not clean, or we're misaligned, then it's going to be very difficult to actually channel our higher self. And that's where the Artemisias come in. They're very good at revealing the shadow that hasn't been looked at. Another really powerful quality of particularly mugwort, Artemisia vulgaris, is of alignment, of realignment. And so it's imperative, I would suggest, that we become centered and aligned to our highest potential, to our higher selves. And, I just have to say, and I've joked about this before, you are literally the most amazing, wonderful woman I've never met, Pam Gregory. And, quantum plant healing as a tribe, as a concept, as part of New Earth is really very much down to all of the videos I've done with you. I'd say probably more than 90% of the people in our tribe are watchers of our videos, particularly yours. And of course, I also want to pay homage to our friend, Janet Trelaw, who channels the Ascended Master Zach, as we were joking earlier. earlier, Zach has really brought forth a lot of the plant wisdom from those higher realms in terms of plants like horsetail and wormwood and many, many other plants that are all assisting us right now. And, you know, thinking about that Pluto moving into Aquarius and a more quantum way of connecting in community, that's what we've created. We've managed somehow using this technology, which I never really thought would work. We've managed to create an online quantum tribe that is connected all over the world through plants, through energy lines, but also through Zoom and through the internet. And we've managed to create a global tribe now numbering into hundreds and hundreds of people and growing every single day. And so if plants and astrology are your boat, please do come over and join us at quantumplanthealing.com, as we have 2 levels of membership. And each month we do live calls and various other things to bring forth the wisdom of the plants that we can then help empower other people to work with and really benefit from in the same way that many of us have already. And I know that we've talked about this a lot over the last couple of years, but certainly the plans have helped both of us over the last 2 years, right, Pam?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I remember Zach once saying that the plants are actually ahead of us. They anticipate what we need as humans to rebalance us or align us or whatever. They're ahead of the game. They are the higher species, the plants. We're the bumpkins following behind, as it were.
Right, exactly. And of course, you know, even just what I said, all joking aside, is like, you know, we've managed to help and create so many people and so many different things over the last couple of years. And of course, you've been doing this much longer than I have. But again, quantum, we're able to connect in an energetic space to do these videos. And we haven't never met in person. And to me, I hope that is not the permanent case, but definitely for sure, it shows me that by thinking out of the box, we can actually have a very, very powerful effect that helps not just ourselves, but many other people too. So keep thinking out of the box, folks. You know, this is the new earth. This is a new way of being. And, you know, whether you work with astrology, whether you work with plants, or, you know, over at QPH, we also work with Mayan magic and the Mayan calendar, which makes every single day important. In the Mayan calendar, every day has a glyph, which brings into focus what is the energy of that day. It's mind-blowingly multidimensional once you even understand a little bit about what the ancestors were able to bring through. And of course, also just to throw out an old cliche, but one I think that's very true, we are the ancestors, literally, that we've been waiting for, possibly even the reincarnations of those ancestors that we look to. So, you know, this is a time for us to wake up, remember who we are in all of our amazing glory, and start sharing those gifts with the world. And then also marvel at how our brothers and sisters are doing the same thing and meet each other, you know, in a place of equality where we can, you know, be free of the old paradigms, you know, the old Pluto and Capricorn energies. You know, we're moving into a new space now. And I think that this equinox is a really good time to, if you haven't already, and I'm sure many of you have, if you haven't already set your shamanic tuning fork for the next 12 months and for the rest of your life, then take this opportunity with both hands, because it really is a gift to us all.
Thank you, David, and thank you for all you're doing for the world. Thank you, thank you.
Bless you, and thank you, Pam. I know I speak on behalf of everybody else. Like, you know, you are a national treasure, not just to Britain, but to the whole world now. And we all thank you for the work that you do, because you are relentless, and I know how hard you work. And, you know, having to do videos twice is not something that either of us really enjoy doing, but I really enjoy doing the second one with you. And it maybe even came out better than the one yesterday. So yeah. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you to the wonderful Pam Gregory for taking time up to do this preview for us all to benefit from. And we look forward to all seeing you very soon. Ciao for now, everybody.
Lots of love, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye.